Once upon a time in a small, busy town filled with noisy markets and crowded streets, there lived a merchant named Daniel. He was not a rich man, but he was hardworking and honest. Each morning he shouldered his bundle of bright clothes, shiny trinkets, and colorful pots and walked the narrow lanes to set up his stall. He hoped that one day his efforts would bring him the success and peace he longed for. Days at the market were full of shouting vendors, bargaining voices, the clatter of carts, and the smell of spices. Despite all his effort, Daniel's business did not grow as he wished. Many evenings he felt tired and defeated. The money he earned was barely enough to feed his family and keep their small, wobbly house above the alley. At night, when the town quieted and the lamps guttered out, Daniel would sit by the window and stare up at the stars. He wondered if his life would ever change. Would his dreams ever come true? One cold morning, as Daniel hurried along the lane, a small shape on the ground stopped him. A pigeon lay there, its wing crooked and trembling. It could not fly. Daniel felt a sudden pain in his chest, an ache not for himself, but for the fragile creature. He bent and lifted the bird into his hands. The pigeon looked at him with soft, trusting eyes. Without hesitation, Daniel wrapped it in his scarf and carried it home. At home, he made a tiny bed from an old basket and cleaned the pigeon's wing as best he could. He fed it crumbs and whispered encouragements while his wife, Emily, hummed a soft tune that had always soothed their children when they were small. Days passed, and under Daniel's careful watch the bird began to mend. He named it Blaze, light, because it brought a warmth into his tired life that he hadn't felt in a long time. Caring for Blaze changed Daniel in small, steady ways. He learned to notice little joys, the bird's gentle coos at dawn, the way it would stretch its wings and test the air, the trembling hope in its first flutter. The simple act of tending to another living thing made his heart kinder and his spirit stronger. He began to greet customers with a brighter smile, to listen more patiently, to offer fairer prices. In the market, people began to take note. Here was a man whose goods were clean and honest, and whose manner was quietly generous. Then one evening, as the sky flushed violet, Daniel heard the soft flap of wings. Blaze rose from the basket and, with a shaky but determined beat, flew to perch on Daniel's shoulder. The little victory filled him with a fierce courage. If Blaze could heal and fly again, perhaps he could lift his own fortunes too. The next day, Daniel returned to his stall with a new steadiness. He sold his wares with renewed pride and gave of himself with an open heart. Business improved slowly. Word of his integrity spread. Still, clouds of doubt and fear sometimes rolled across his days. There were slow weeks when coin was thin and worry heavy. Each time despair crept close, he would put his hand to his chest and remember the small pigeon who had never lost hope. One bustling afternoon, a wealthy merchant passing through stopped at Daniel's stall. He admired the bright cloth, then paused to watch how Daniel spoke softly and fairly to everyone, how he wrapped a broken toy for a poor child without asking for payment. The merchant, Mr. Thompson, was struck. He offered Daniel a place working in the city, where trade was broad and customers many. The thought of leaving his town made Daniel hesitate. He feared the unfamiliar and the cost of leaving behind the life he knew. Yet when he felt Blaze's steady weight on his shoulder, when he watched the bird launch itself into the wide blue, he understood that to rise, sometimes you must leave the ledge that feels safe. In the city, the work was harder and the streets wilder, but Daniel held to the lessons he had learned: kindness, honesty, patience. He worked steadily, listened carefully, and treated people with respect. Slowly, years like careful stitches, his business grew. He saved, he sent coins home, and he learned the rhythms of a larger world. He became a successful merchant, but he never forgot the small basket and the tender mornings of tending a wounded wing. Years later, richer not just in coin but in calm wisdom, Daniel returned to the town that had raised him. The market looked both smaller and dearer than he remembered. He paused in the lane outside his old door. Above him, cutting the bright sky, a familiar shadow passed. Blaze, now strong and free, circled once and dipped toward him in a graceful arc. The pigeon landed on the roof and cooed, as if greeting an old friend. Daniel understood then that life would always bring storms. days that bruised and nights that seemed endless. But he also knew something truer, that hope often arrives in the smallest shapes, that a gentle hand can mend what seems hopeless, and that courage can be found in the patient choice to try again. He thought of the nights spent watching stars, of the handful of crumbs, of the first faltering flutter that had changed everything. The story of Daniel and Blaze became a quiet legend in the town, a tale told at kitchen tables and woven into lullabies. It taught people that even when life seems heavy, even when one's wings are broken, healing begins with a simple act of care. Sometimes help comes not as thunder or fortune, but as a warm basket, a bandaged wing, a steady presence by your side. So whenever the town's lamps flickered and worry darkened a familiar face, someone would say, "Remember the merchant and the pigeon." And they would think of small lights that stubbornly burn, of kindness that repairs and courage that lifts. For even broken wings can mend, and even the smallest light can brighten the darkest night.